confusion of Wednesday and Thursday last week. I always meant it Wednesday. That is what I had put in the Zoom, but the mail I sent to the office, I had mistakenly put Thursday, which was the cause of the trouble. And I was very surprised on Wednesday when I logged in, there was nobody. I said, it can happen, even half the students don't join, but you can't have nobody joining. Then I realized that probably I made some goof up and check. Anyway, that's okay. We need 2 lectures a week. We have I put 3 in any case. So, and we have always the option of having an extra session. If some of you feel that some points you have not understood later, you feel we can have an extra session to cover those points, and those who are interested can come in. So, as it is, I in particular and generally CMI faculty members in general are very open to giving more time to students, all the more so in this COVID times and this online teaching, and you are attending from home and so on and so forth. So only thing is you have to be open and convey to me during the session, after the session, in an email, wherever. But if you don't tell, we won't know. Okay. All right. So yeah, maybe last time we talked, or some people had also asked about the TS. So in between, you would have got an email from one of the TAs on behalf of the 4 TAs who had been assigned. There has been some change today. The number has been raised to 6 and some reassignment. So by this evening, I will also ensure that the updated thing comes to you, and you would have the numbers and names of all the TAs which are going to be there. So Ritika, who perhaps wrote the mail to you, she continues to be, but 2 of the other 4 have moved to some other course, and we have 4 others who are going to be TA for this course. So let's start. It's 10:33 now. Yeah. So last time we started talking about, I mean, the first session, of course, that it started talking about how ages ago people had realized that rational numbers is not good enough, because they were the ones which they could concretely write down. And remember, those days there was no notion of defining. I mean, the numbers are there, only you have to figure out how do you compute them. That was the thought. And for rationals, they could easily put, but they realized that there is a lot of things remaining beyond rationals. They could draw some graphs whose length they need to decide what it is, but it is not rational. So over time, people left this in the background and developed a whole lot of mathematics. Okay, and a whole lot of things that you study were developed well before this formal mathematics made its entry. The formal mathematics has its own advantage, that when you write something, you are sure that what you are saying is correct, and somebody else cannot necessarily come and say that no, this is wrong. So, but in many ways, both things are important. Focusing only on formal is not good enough. Somebody suggests something and talks to you, going beyond formal mathematics, one should listen. Otherwise, you can't be doing a physics course, because the physics course, the math they use is going to be always ahead of what your math teacher is teaching. So this dichotomy exists, continues, and one has to live with that. But later, at some point, you will come back to that and formalize. So, in fact, the approach that whenever the coursework for the BSc was designed, it was thought that we will talk about real number system, but without formally defining it first. Okay? We'll make it just axiomatic, and later in second semester you can make a construction of the set of real numbers. But if you start with that, then what has happened is, and this has happened elsewhere also, that some students lose interest, that why we are wasting time doing all these things. Okay, so so what does axiomatic mean? So we'll I'll soon share my screen and we'll put an axiom, or we'll I'll introduce some notations and we'll start assuming that such things exist and start working with them. Then we'll construct them. When it comes to formal, the way we wrote down rational functions as P by Q is already not acceptable in the formal system, because what is P by Q in the formal system? All you have is integers. So what do you mean by 2 divided by 3? 2 divided by 3. So in the formal system, even that start needs to have some work done. Okay, that is easy to do because you simply define rational numbers to be pairs of integers, and P dash Q, where P is any integer, Q is a natural number, and P and Q, the GCD is 1. If you take it like that, then you have to start defining what does addition, multiplication, division, etc. I mean, which is easy to do because you know what it is. Just you have to write down the formulae and say that it makes sense. So rationals, to bring them in formal thing is much easier. If somebody has this, you can either read somewhere, do yourself, talk to each other, and if you still have confusion, write to me. Okay, what do I mean by formalizing rational numbers? Okay, but that thing will also be clear as we go along today. So let me now share my screen. So all right, so we just start by saying let R be a set that contains all integers. Suppose there are, along with it, we have functions addition and multiplication. On Z we had discussed how do you add and multiply on all integers, we know that, and these are extended to R. So you should be familiar with the notion of you have a function on Z, you extend that function, I mean you extend that set Z to a set R. So R contains Z. That is what we mean by you extend that set Z to R. You have added some new things. At the moment, we are not defining what has been added. Then we say that this function is extended to R. That means if A and B both are in Z, then A plus B, you know what it means. Now, if A and B both are in R, you have to define what does A plus B mean. So it is defined in some fashion. You don't define, say how it is defined. But by extension, it means that when A and B both are in Z, then you are not redefining A plus B. So if A and B both are in Z, the new notion is exactly the same as the older notion, except that if one of them or both of them are not in Z, then when you had not defined it earlier, now you are defining it in some way. Because I'm still entering and asking, should I? All right. So that is what extending a function from Z to R means. Okay. So the addition is defined on R, and if A and B are in R, A plus B is in R, also in R. Then A plus B is same as B plus C. So properties that we had discussed last time on Z, and then that we had verified that we can easily verify that it also continues to work on rationals. Now we are putting this as an axiom that you have some set R which contains Z. You have these functions addition and multiplication or relations addition and multiplication from R cross R to R defined, and they satisfy these properties. So for addition functions, I have put the blue color. So A plus B same as B plus A plus 0 is A plus B plus C is A plus of B plus C, and A, for every A there is a D. that A plus B is there. Additive inverse of every element exists. So what we have done, we knew these 5 properties for addition of two integers. We say that we have extended these integers to a much larger set, and this relationship addition has been extended to that larger set, and it continues to satisfy the properties that we had earlier seen. So this first 5 are for addition, next 5 are for multiplication. Essentially the same, except that inverse is there only for non-zero elements. So these 10 things which we had discussed for rationals, we demand that Z. Now you may say that, but where are rationals? We had taken R to be extension only of Z. Now you can see that rationals are already there, because you take 2 and 3. Okay, so 2, 3, 5 all are there. Now this says that 2 times 3 is also there already, so 6 is there, and so on. And then for every element there is an additive inverse when it is not 0. So for 3 there is an additive inverse. So 1 by 3 is already there now in our R.
Sir, multiplicative inverse, right?
1 by 3 is there, then multiplication is also there. So this way you can verify that if you take R to be this, there is a set R and relations plus and dot defined on it, then already R contains your rational numbers. How it is denoted, how it is what is the symbol used for that is a different matter. But already this one says that you have set of rationals is already there in R. Okay. So, but this is not all. We are going to add a few more conditions on our set R. So 1 to 10, this property is 1 to 10. As yet I have somehow missed writing it. I will write that before I send it to you, that the multiplication distributes over the sum. So these properties will tell you that what you have is a field. Okay. I will need to add that here. Now, the additive inverse is denoted by minus of A, and A plus minus of A, we can also start writing it as A minus A. Likewise, the multiplicative inverse, which we have said exists for non-zero elements, is can be denoted by 1 by A, and so on. So, the important thing is, we have just said that R is some set. We have not described what that set is, but already we have started talking about multiplicative inverse, 1 by A, etc., etc. Along with that, now we bring in a new notion, another notion, that an order on a set F is a relation. I have just put it as this symbol less than, because this will correspond to our less than notion. So an order is a thing which is such that for ABC in F, A less than B and B less than C implies A less than C. I'm just going to read it as less than, but it's some relation which we are noting it by less than and are calling it less than. So what does that order mean? What order will do is it will give you a subset of F cross F, or okay, and every element, if A comma B is there, will say A less than B, if and only, that's it. So that's the order. Now, property 1 says A less than B and B less than C implies A less than C, and if A and B are in F1 and only one of the 3 statements given below holds, either A is less than B, or A equal to B, or B is less than A. So now you have some set F, and on that you have this relation, and we postulate these two. Such a thing is called a order. Okay. It is often convenient to use A bigger than B to mean same as B less than A. Also, A less than equal to B means either A less than B or A equal to B. So these are things which we are familiar with and used to using those notations. Except that what exactly is less than this notation, we have kept it unspecified. It is just somehow been given to you. Now we have an order relationship already. Now we'll say that a subset H of F is or bounded above by an element B also in F. So you have a subset of F. We say it is bounded above by beta if A in H implies A less than equal to beta. So think big. I mean, if our F was just set of integers, then this is what we want. So essentially, those things we are saying that they already are there with this set F. What is that set F? We have not specified at the moment. In this case, beta is called an upper bound of H. Likewise, the set H is said to be bounded below by gamma if every element in H is greater than equal to gamma. In this case, gamma is said to be lower bound of H. So this part, yes, at the moment not specified what F is. We have said the set F has an order, so it satisfies condition 1 and 2. And then we'll say a subset will be bounded under this order. It is implied, okay, because we have only one order in consideration. We don't have to say under what. So it is bounded above.
Excuse me, sir. I have a question about the order. Does it need to be
equal to beta? It is bounded below by gamma if every element is greater than equal to beta. In this case,
sir, is the order an injective relation from F cross F to, like, for example, like let's say F is just 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Can you have an order where 0, 1, and 2 are ordered, and then 3, 4, 5 are ordered, but they're just separately?
now we assume, so let's go back. We now assume that the set R functions addition multiplication satisfying 1 to 10 above, and further that it has order relation. Order relation is such that 0 less than 1. Because before that we had not given any meaning. Now we put one more meaning on order, that it is less than 1. And gamma is called a totally ordered field. So now let me I have added for it to be a field, this 1 to 10 were needed, but that multiplication distributes over addition. Okay, I missed writing this, so I'm added that. I have to add that distributive condition. Further, so now, so earlier options we have that it's a field, and now we are adding that it has an order relation. And order relation is such that 0 is less than 1. Then we are calling this a totally ordered field. This is a definition of what is a totally ordered field. Field, you know, addition, two operations, addition, multiplication, satisfying the set of assumptions. And then it also has an order. And the word totally ordered also comes from number 2 here. That given
Hello,
two
sir.
elements, one and only one of these 3 statements always true. Now, just to I've spoken continuously for maybe 20 minutes, so let me take a small break and ask some of you to speak at least. That can you recall some set and what it can also be called an order, but it doesn't satisfy axiom 2. Okay, let's see, there is some. Yeah, so yeah, one of you said it's not a function because we have two distinct. It's not a function. It's a relation. Yes. It's a function on R cross R, so it's a relation. You're right there. Shikesh showed that. That's correct. And then mean partition of F cross F. Avinash Rathore asked, isn't that mean partition? So are you referring by the ordering? I meant, can every element F be compared to any other element of F? Yes. So that is what this option 2 is saying here, this assumption 2, that given any 2 elements, they are either equal or one is less or the other is less. Yeah. So at the moment, when I said, can you think about someone which is not totally ordered? Yeah, it's not, then it's called partially ordered. Ordered, all right, but if some elements are ordered, that is called ordered. And if everything satisfies condition 2, then it's a total order, and otherwise partial order. So can someone try to speak again? It says I cannot hear you, but yeah, now I can hear you. I don't know why. I had never it off, but I don't know what went on. Okay, now at least I can hear you. Okay, so existence of partial orders answers my question. Yeah. So there can be partial orders, but they need not, all orders need not be total. And my question was, I didn't mention that about inputs. So can you think about having used ordering where it is not a total order? Not artificially constructed, but naturally occurring. Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
The order for the partial order.
So not so well.
Sorry, I wasn't able to hear, Professor. My internet is a little bad. Could you repeat that?
Yeah. So my thing was, can you think about if have a natural example where you have a partial order or where you have order but it doesn't satisfy condition 2. And
The set of subsets of a set.
set of subsets of a set, yeah, and you order them by inclusion, right? So you have a set, you make a power set, and then you say that two subsets are ordered if one is contained in the other. If you call that, then that's a partial order. So somebody asks, what is a partial order? So partial order is just if you have a relation which satisfies condition 1 here, then it's a partial order. And somebody has written, Avinash has written, you can have total order on any line, partial order on the whole plane. Yeah. So on plane, we can define a partial order. You can also define a total order. Okay. It's not that on the plane you can only define partial order, but the natural one which comes that you have A comma B and C comma D. You say A comma B is less than C comma D. If A is less than C and B is less than D. That is fine, but then that is a partial order. You have in many ways you can define total orders on that also. That may or may not be of interest to you, but it can be total order can also be defined. But what is the so-called dictionary order? Yeah.
People never turn the complex into a.
Sorry. Think about complex ordering complex plane by modulus. If you say that one complex number is less than another complex number, if modulus of one is less than modulus of the other, but then there can be the equality may not hold. The modulus may be the same, but the two numbers may not be equal. So in that sense, it is a partial order. Okay. So point is that we are calling it order and less than, but if you just put an arbitrary set, there is no such requirement. Okay, we just need something which satisfies condition 1 and 2. And on the plane, let us give a total order. So my plane is a pairs A comma B and C comma D. A and B are maybe rationals for now because they are our concrete objects. So we say that A comma B is less than C comma D if A is less than C or A equal to C and B less than D. This is the so-called dictionary ordering. And that's a total order. But that is not the order we have in mind when we are thinking of them as a plane. When you want to
Sir,
huh?
Sir, in this A equal to B condition, I mean, this will only hold if A and B are the same. I mean, in the ordering we define.
A equal to B has a concrete meaning. You are not redefining A equal to B. We are only redefining less than. But we are
Okay, sir. Okay. So the equality preserves the notion of the being same.
as in set theory, that equality is not being redefined. Equality means they are the same objects. So we start with the set F. So equality is already defined on that. Okay.
Sir, but the example you gave about ordering like on the complex plane using modulus, in that ordering, A can equal B, but A doesn't have to be the same as B, right?
No. So we say that you order this by modulus doesn't mean you divide equality by modulus. You will say that a complex number U is less than complex number V if modulus U is less than modulus V. That's it.
Okay, you don't define equality using. Okay,
no,
fine.
You cannot redefine equality.
Okay.
You cannot redefine equality. Okay. Yeah. So where we are going is we have started with some set R which had this field properties. Then we introduce this notion of ordering and total order. Okay, and then we say that our now assume that the set R with functions plus and minus satisfies 1 to 10 given earlier. It has this functions have or this instead of functions I should change it to relations which are addition and multiplication, and further that it has an order relation less than, and we just also put that less than is the 0 and 1 are already there in our R. 0 is the additive identity, R is the 1 is the multiplicative identity, and we are saying that since this is a total order, either it will be this or the other way. We just put it down that it is 0 less than 1. Okay, and all this together is then called a totally ordered field. And we had already observed, or we can observe, that rationals is a totally ordered field. So what is new? As yet, we would like to go way beyond rationals when we are talking about this object R. So what there have been a whole lot of things about what is the best way of extending it beyond so that it achieves our purpose. What is our purpose? That objects that we know, lengths of everything, square roots of numbers, cube roots of numbers, and lengths of a circle which you can describe, and so on and so forth are there. Infinite sums that you can define are there. So you want pi, you want e, you want rationals, you want square roots, all those the objects you want. That is our aim. Okay, and not only that, that somebody cannot cook up some new thing and say that it is not there. So we want to be as extensive as possible. Okay, that is the aim. And people spend a lot of time talking about such things and trying to figuring out what is the way to do it. And there is no unique way of doing it. There was a way in Zoom to simply declare that everybody is admittable to my course. So I'm not yet to figure that out, so that I don't have to keep struggling every time someone comes. I have to find that and give money. All right. So our aim is, as I mentioned, that we already know that rationals are there, but that is not good enough for you because square root of 2, which you would like to talk about, is not there. So we wanted to add elements. Then
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
I had a doubt.
Yeah.
Sir, how do we know that R is not Q? I mean, there are elements in R which are not in Q. How do we know that? I mean, maybe R is equal to Q. It can happen. I mean, till now with the axioms.
R is definitely above. At the moment, R equal to Q is allowed. We want to put some more condition on R, which will ensure that R is not equal to Q, and we are going beyond strictly. Okay.
Oh, sir, so means we are defining more properties on R to
Yes,
include more elements.
Yes, to ensure, not just to include. The property will simply say that Q is not good enough. We want to add more elements. Okay, that is the whole idea. So, as I said, historically there were many ways of doing it, but here is one such. We now assume that R satisfies the so-called least upper bound property. So what is the least upper bound property? We have yet to define. So least upper bound property is the following. If H is a non-empty subset of R, and if it admits an upper bound beta, then H admits a least upper bound alpha. And least, the meaning is given here. If there exists a beta such that A in H implies A is less than or equal to beta, so this is whereby mean that beta is upper bound. So we are matching We are matching our understanding of what we want to achieve with these notations we have introduced and calling it least upper bound. It could have been simply defined without calling it anything. We could have just said LUB, whatever is LUB mean. Okay. So there exists a beta such that whenever for every A in H, A is less than equal to beta. That is, A is less than beta or A equal to beta. That is the meaning we have given to less than equal. If there is a beta which is above, which is upper bound for every element in H, then there is a smallest such. And what is smallest such? There exists alpha such that alpha is upper bound, and if there is any other upper bound, then alpha is less than equal to gamma. So this is the most important thing, and least upper bound property. And so every element which is bounded above, then amongst all the numbers which are can be taken as a bounds for that set, okay, there is one which is the smallest. And now we assume this property that our R satisfies all our earlier properties and it has least upper bound property. And this we can now say that now we have ensured that Q is not equal to R. Why? Let's take all numbers whose square is less than equal to 2. We can show that it has upper bound, and we know that it has no least upper bound. These are the kind of things you would have done for showing that square root is not square root of 2 is not rational number. Similar arguments, and I think it would be a good exercise for you to try to do yourself. If you can do it, fine. If not, try to read a book or form a group, talk to each other, learn from one of you who have done it, argue, etc., etc. And if not, always you can ask me or the TS. Okay? That why adding least upper bound property now ensures that the set of rationals is no longer the one we are looking for. Is no longer equal to R with least upper bound property. So we now say that therefore we assume now that R is a totally ordered field that satisfies the least upper bound property. And lo and behold, just this adding this assumption that or requirement on our set R takes care of what we are looking for. So earlier people may have tried various things, and this does it. And what we are going to do this semester is we are just going to assume that there is a R with this property. And then without putting down exactly what is an element in R is just using what we have assumed. The 10 properties, distributive properties, order property that it's a total order, and least upper bound property. That is all we have assumed on R. Everything that we kind of can imagine about real numbers and so on and so forth, we will prove only using these. Then second semester, you will also see formally a construction of R. And the curriculum description strictly says that R is only without construction, you introduce R. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do in between. I'm not going to a formal definition of how R can be constructed. But I'm going to describe to you one way of introducing R. Now, all of you in your school, of course, you have done the decimal numbers, okay? And you would have done things of the kind. How would you have represented 1/3 as a decimal number? Recurring 1/3 is 0.3 recurring, right? So, in a sense, you would have already introduced a decimal number whose expansion, whose decimal parts are allowed to be infinitely many. They never end. They keep going on without formally saying what you are meaning, but introduce it. And that is the meaning. 1 by 3 is 0.3 recurring. And then somewhere or the other, you would have seen pi and e, these two numbers. So 0.3 recurring can also be then changed to, you write 1 by 17, then that also can be written as a recurring thing, but not one element doesn't recur, but forget how many, but perhaps 3. So you take 3 and then after that the same 3 keep occurring again and again. So these are recurring numbers. All decimal, perhaps large number of large you can have lots of examples of these recurring things. It could also be that initially there is something and then some other segment starts which occurs. So 0.135 and then 454545. So first 3 are fixed as it is, and then after that it's next 2 are recurring. And you would have played with them all along and would have formula of how do you convert a number like this to a rational number, etc. You would have learned. Then you would have learned that somewhere that pi and e don't fit in this. You don't have a recurring expansion for pi or e. No matter how far you go, you don't have a recurring thing. Something new may come up. Then there were efforts of computing pi up to so many places of decimals, right? So this notion of decimal representation has been there, and formally that, you know, every number on real line can be represented as a decimal expansion, except the question is how do you compute it? Now, when we want to define our set R like that and assume that we have a notion of before the decimal point you have finitely many numbers, after the decimal you could have finite or infinitely many, and they could be recurring or non-recurring way of describing them. First thing, the equality question. Is there some way that two numbers which look to be different with expansions can actually be the same numbers on your line? And do you want to treat them as same or different? And you will see that if you really want to add addition, multiplication, and all these things, you have to treat them as the same number. Otherwise, you are going to be in all kinds of trouble. In other words, you would have learned in school that 0.9 recurring is same as 1. 1.0. Or 0.19 recurring is same as 0.2. So this starts with a problem. But now what you have to do is you say that the set R is set of all decimal expansion numbers where before the decimal point there is finitely many, but after the decimal it could be finite or infinite. Finite means if you write the infinite expansion, it ends with zeros. Okay? So here, at no point the element 9 is recurring. So you first describe all these things and then you take out all things which have 9 recurring anywhere toward the end. Wherever 0.9 recurring is there, effectively the previous digit you have to add 1 to that and stop. So 0.19 recurring you will remove, you will not allow it. 0.2 is already there, these two mean the same thing, so now we remove them. So if you define the set R with these properties, you will need to work a little bit with defining addition and multiplication, etc. Additive and multiplicative inverses will need to work out, but these things can be done effectively. You have done them in school. Whatever you did in school, you push it here, and you can see that that set R will satisfy all the properties that we are describing. Okay. And now, with this, if two things have looks the same, then they are the same number. With that, you can start defining ordering as the if you start at the decimal points and you go left and go right, and if everything should agree. Otherwise, that will tell you how you define ordering on that R. Then you can argue that it's a total order, and so on and so forth. Okay. So the point is, forget the amount of work you may need to do, but you can come up with a formally defining a R and working out such that these things happen. So though we will not use that the element of R is a decimal expansion of some number or so on and so forth, we will only assume the assumptions on R that we have been given. Okay. There are two other constructions of R which are most popular. One is called Dedekind cuts. The other is called Cauchy sequence construction. And we will use perhaps the other one if I teach the course. There will be some other teacher who teaches the course. And so formally we have not done a construction of R. So I will not ask you any question about that. But for understanding sake, I think it is little better than just saying that it's just an abstract assumption that such a R exists. All our proofs, we will just use the properties that we have assumed about R. Any questions?
So basically, we are just assuming that such an R exists and satisfying those axioms. And I mean, the existence is the condition that we are assuming. That is.
Yeah. We are saying that R with all
R,
these
and of course there is the according to this
totally ordered field, and it also has the least upper bound property.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay. I see there were some other chat messages which I missed. Okay. Okay, so somebody had asked that why does having LUB mean that R is not just Q? So on Q, as I argued or told you that you take Q to be all elements whose square is less than equal to 2. And then you can argue that it does not satisfy least upper bound property.
Yes, sir.
Now, SQRT belongs to R but not Q, but we have not yet defined SQRT. But yes, you can define square root on R given the conditions you have put. We have yet to define it, and that will tell you that there exist elements in Q which don't have. Yeah, SQRT2 belongs to R. We'll have to show that via the least or upper bound property. And then we will be showing that it is not equal to Q. Yeah. So,
sir, so why are we saying that the least upper bound of that set is not rational?
no, I have left it as an exercise for you to work out. Okay. Or it will follow from something which I am going to do later today. At the moment, I have not done.
Sir, I have a question. Like, is the set R like a unique set, or like just like in a rational holds all the properties, like R holds all the properties as like Q. Is there any other field which also holds the property of R but is a superset of R?
No. All the actions, not the 10 axioms, but all our actions that we have talked about, namely addition, multiplication with the required properties, distributiveness, order relation, total order, and least upper bound property. If you put all these, then it kind of uniquely identifies R. That means if you have two sets, you have a set R, one of you takes it, somebody else does another construction, Dedekind's construction, somebody else does Cauchy construction. All of us are talking about the same object.
So, thank you, sir.
Sir, so is in the future, is there no scope of extending this field of R, like we extended rationals to R? Can we extend reals to something else?
Well, you can't extend if you keep the same assumptions.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. I mean, over so many years, it has not been extended by adding more.
Not just it has not been, but it cannot be done is what is proven.
Okay, it's been proved. Okay.
Having said this, though not quite a thing to discuss in the first year course, but you know, if you do this and then from here you can say, once you put in the least upper bound property, you can argue we are going to do that very next thing, that will rule out infinitesimal numbers. Okay. But then does it prove that Cauchy, Leibniz was wrong? Because he did all his proofs using infinitesimal numbers. Well, Leibniz was wrong if we interpret what he wrote as on the set R that we are construction. That doesn't say that he's wrong. Maybe he had another definition. Maybe we can have another definition of a set of real numbers which will satisfy his infinitesimal condition, and then what he wrote is correct. Okay. But if we make these assumptions, then what Leibniz wrote is wrong. That's all we can control. So, is least upper bound property natural to assume? Well, it's up to us to debate. All we say is that it conflicts the existence of infinitesimal numbers as claimed by Leibniz. And suffices to tell you only that various attempts at formalizing what Leibniz had done had been tried, few successful. The most successful was an attempt made in 1960 by, I'm forgetting the name, but then it is called
Robinson.
Huh? Robinson. And hyperreal numbers. Okay. And but we will not get into that. That will take us far. But only thing one should remember is that our requiring our set to have least upper bound property doesn't mean that anybody who made some other assumptions is wrong. That's all we need to remember. When we are saying that infinitesimals don't exist, they don't exist in the formulation that we have taken. Okay. So I hope such an extension is there, namely the hyperreals. Yes, there is an extension that is hyperreals. I won't do it in this course, but if quite a few of you want to see such a construction, I can arrange a separate lecture by me, where we can see how such a thing can be constructed. But it may confuse some, and therefore I'm not going to do it as part of this course. Okay. I just wanted to point out that when we learn something, we put some assumptions and we believe them to be true, doesn't mean that if anybody else uses some other thing, that is wrong. So, okay, in this diversion, you perhaps already in class 12, your math teacher would have said that, you know, dx by dy or dx by dt makes sense, but dx and dt by themselves do not make sense, unless at least you are using them as integrals. Integral fx dx makes sense, but you can't just say dx times dy or things like that by themselves without you are bringing in either divided by another derivative or multiplication or integral. Okay, so math teacher would say that by itself dx doesn't mean anything, and yet perhaps in the physics course, perhaps in some other course, the teachers would be using dx and dt left and right. Okay, and this used to bother me a lot when I was in school, and for some years later too. I would refuse to take any statement which is using dx or dt alone without being as a ratio or as an integral sign. We'll say our math teacher has convinced us that such objects do not exist. Till somehow I was brought to read the Robinson thing and saw that in fact there exists a framework where these things make perfect sense. So all I'm telling you is that we should not discard something just because it doesn't fit in the framework that you have been taught. This is the most commonly used framework for right reasons, etc., etc. Okay. And as one of you, as Bijan has written, this served the motivation for learning analysis, at least for you. So what served as the motivation for learning analysis? Can you?
Because the use of these informal languages, like even in high school, we use Gauss integral, which is literally a surface integral, but we don't exactly define those, and not nowhere in the mathematics curriculum till class 12 formally, and otherwise, and the basics, of course, the simple differential equation, where we just swap things like ds and dy, but but can't formally in the calculus chapter, but we are doing that in the differential equation chapter. I didn't understand that.
So just like the way the subject developed, that the notions came first and then somebody went down and formalized this and said, this can be done, this cannot be done. So we continue with that. And but to formalize these things, we need to do a lot more hard work, and that happens subsequent time. Okay. So right now we are revisiting your school mathematics. Okay. We are not discarding it. We are creating a framework which gives you formally what kind of things you did there are correct and what may have a problem. Okay. That is how one looks at it. Okay. Yeah. So if you write something on the chat which I failed to see because I had to read my what is on my PDF file, I have to put this chat away, and then one of you can just tell me, sir, there is a chat, there is a message in the chat box. Okay, even if it is not by you, somebody else, you see it, you alert me. Okay, all right. So now, what is that property?
Sir, so actually, I have a very quick question.
Sure.
Like in the last lecture, you also said that the Archimedean property, is a contradiction to infinitesimals existing.
That's our next slide. That is the next slide I'm coming.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I hope so. My memory is correct. Okay, wait. It should come. It's called real numbers, and so I've just what I said already. I've written here. We will move. We will assume that we have an R, which is a totally ordered field that satisfies least upper bound property. In the next semester, you will do this. Okay, and all our deductions about real numbers will happen by our assumptions. So I'd already said this, and I've once again listed all the 10 things that. Okay, now, so here is the theorem, the least upper bound property. And I'm now calling it a theorem, which means our assumptions that we have put on R, we can reduce it from those. So let R be the something, R from now on for us is something which satisfies all the things that we have talked about. Okay. Now, totally ordered field satisfying least upper bound property. Okay. Now, so if you have an x bigger than 0, then there is an n such that 1 is less than n dot x. So this is the Archimedean property. And remember, we have not said that there is another real number such that y dot x exceeds 1, because that is not exactly Archimedean property. So n dot x, when we are multiplying by a natural number, it means that you can take x plus x n times. So that is n times x. So by adding x repeatedly, you can exceed 1. Repeatedly, finitely many times, you can exceed 1. That is the Archimedean property. Any question about this? I'm going to do the proof, because this will now start telling us how do you prove a statement in terms of our R. Okay. And it is by negation. Suppose not. So we have a x positive, and suppose that n dot x is less than 1 for all n. So there is a number x and n dot x is less than 1 for all n. So now let's take this set A as n dot x. So you take a positive number and keep adding it, and keep a new addition you have taken, you put that also as an element in our A. Then take the last one, you add one more time x and put that as an element in our A. So our A is the set of all those things, okay, all n dot x. Now, negation of 1 means there is no means that this set is bounded by 1, because we have said that there is no such n. We have said this assumption is wrong. We are assuming that. So under that assumption, 1 is the upper bound for A, and our least upper bound property now will tell us this is a non-empty set because x is already there. X is 1 dot x is x, so it is already there. And it's a non-empty set which has upper bound. So least upper bound property says there is a least upper bound. Okay. All right. So then we will have that n dot x is less than or equal to alpha. Typographical error. Or all n in B became gate in B. I don't know why. Yeah. So we have n dot x is less than or equal to alpha for all n. And half y is not a upper bound because
less than the upper bound.
Alpha is
I mean less than LUB.
Alpha is the least upper bound. Alpha by 2 is strictly less than alpha. So it is not an upper bound. Right. As a result, there exists a m such that m times x has exceeded half alpha. Right. It is not upper bound means there is a m for which this holds. But now you take 2 to the other side, 2 to so to speak, but this will tell you that alpha is less than 2m times x. You add both the things and use those jugglery of our assumptions, and you can conclude that alpha is less than 2m times x, and that contradicts that alpha is an upper bound. So just using our assumptions and existence of least upper bound property tells us that it satisfies Archimedean property. And this tells us that least up the infinitesimals, as in Leibniz writing, are not part of our set R. Okay. So,
and sir, this is not a two-way implication, right? Because even the rationals alone satisfy this Archimedean property.
yeah.
Yeah.
We have not claimed that it is.
Yeah. Just confirm.
No. In fact, why even rationals? Okay, amongst fields, rationals it isn't for, yeah. So, in fact, you can argue that you take any field which contains rationals but which is contained in R, okay, it will satisfy this property. And you can construct any number of fields, if as long as you do not insist on least upper bound property, between rationals and real numbers satisfying least upper bound property, you can construct host of other fields. Okay, totally ordered fields. For example, if you just add square roots of all numbers and of course, square root of 2 plus square root of 3 is not quite a square root of any other number. So you take you add all such things, sums of finitely many such square roots and multiplications and so on and so forth. So you can construct a field which will have square roots of all numbers, but it will not be R. And you can add to it cube roots and so on and so forth. So you can keep constructing all kinds of fields which don't reach the destination of R, but all of them will satisfy Archimedean property. Okay. The proof will not be the least upper bound property. It's proof you have to proof you'll have to come out through some other means. Okay. Here, all we are saying is that the least upper bound property says that Archimedean property holds. And it therefore rules out the Leibniz construction of. Leibniz never claimed construction. Leibniz says that there exist such numbers and then argued with them. Yeah.
There is no importance of 1 in there. No? It can be any finite value. 1.
Yeah, of course. I remember it as 1. Some books will define. Once we have it with 1, it can be done with anything else. Yeah.
Professor, I had a question.
Yeah.
So on the next page, we've used the fact that we can multiply a 2 on both sides. Do we need to assume that also, or can we prove that from the earlier axioms?
Okay.
So I don't think we ever described the algebraic properties of the order.
Okay. Okay. So we, yeah, I think I have missed doing that, writing that, but I guess we'll just need to add that if A less than B, then any other number, positive number times A is less than the same number times B. And adding and multiplication, both will have to add those values. You are right. I will have to add those two things that if I have a real number, a positive number alpha, then alpha plus A is less than alpha. If A less than B, then alpha plus A is less than alpha plus B. And alpha times A is less than alpha times B. So connect the ordering property with the addition and multiplication. Once we do that, we are done. I should add that, yes. And part of the reason instead of reading a thing from a book, I'm going through this is I have made an error in the sense I may have missed out something, and then we have a discussion going on. If I read from the book, it will just go on, and we can finish a whole chapter in 1 hour without everybody getting what it is being saying. I can even be a little devil and say that I deliberately did not add that just to see if one of you was alert in catching me. I'm not saying that. Okay, I missed saying that actually. I missed adding those two things, connecting the order with addition and multiplication. But it's good that people are alert and are telling me that, yeah, I have missed adding that. Okay. So before, I can't change this in the video clip, but video clip already comes with the end part where I'm now saying this, that yeah, this has to be added. When I send the PDF, I will add the requirement thing and then send it. Okay. So I think this is the one thing which needs to be added. Anything else, if it needs to be added, you see that, you let me know. I will change that. Okay.
Sir, I had a doubt.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't quite understand how Archimedean property and like least. I understood least upper bound property implies Archimedean property, right?
Okay.
But like, is there any field that satisfies Archimedean property but doesn't have like the least upper bound? property. I mean, I didn't quite understand if it's the other way around.
Oh, yeah. I mean, as I was saying that if you just add square roots of all positive real numbers, okay, and do enough jugglery to ensure that that becomes an ordered field, okay, that will not satisfy the least upper bound property, but it will have Archimedean property.
Okay.
So I guess there is a name. I did this analysis, and after that I moved into probability. I don't even, so everything which is taught in algebra, I may have studied it at some point, but that is not on my fingertips. So I guess not this one, but there is something called algebraic field, and that algebraic field will have the least upper bound property, will not have least upper bound property, but it will be Archimedean. I guess algebraic field, I can read up Google.
So do you mean the field of algebraic numbers?
Yeah, so you have to define what is an algebraic number, and then you add that, that's a field. Yeah.
All roots of monic rational polynomials.
Yeah. So that's the algebraic field that will satisfy. That is one of the fields which will have, which does not have least upper bound properties, because if that was the case, then it will follow that all real numbers are are algebraic in our framework, which is not true. But algebraic field has this property. Yeah. So I had thought that I will do those parts today, but we have no shortage of lectures. We can take slow. I was going to prove that how do we deduce that our R has the property, it is that square roots are there, not just square roots, nth root of every positive number is there. How does one prove that? And it is unique and such things. Okay. That I was hoping to do today, but we will take it up next class. You can try to read it anywhere as well. And if I do something wrong, you can catch me also. Or if I do in one way and you have thought of some alternate way, thought of or read alternate way, you can talk about that also. Okay.
So these are all consequences of having the LUB property only, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So totally ordered field with LUB property is our basic framework. And we are studying what all follows from totally ordered field with LUB. Okay. And a whole lot of things follow. In fact, everything that you see as real analysis comes through all just this much. Derivatives, infinite series, summation, all those things all come out of only these assumptions. That is what we will do this semester. Next semester, you can come to a formal definition of R. Informally, we have already done that today. Decimal expansions. And by the way, decimal is just convenient because we all study decimal numbers. More fashionable to also do just binary, just two. Why worry about decimals? Binary. Same thing follows with binary too. That's what computers use, but except computers don't allow you to bring in infinitely many. Doesn't matter what, but it puts upper bound. Your phone numbers may be putting some number. Old phones had 8, now maybe 32. Computers, when I studied first, it was 32. Now 64-bit is there. You could have a higher bit thing also. Yeah.
Sir, but all these axioms, these properly define our field. So why did you say this is unofficial? Like,
because I didn't prove that with that, how will we define addition? How will I define multiplication? What care I need to take? That's all.
okay, we even need to prove those.
Yes. We will need to say exactly how are we defining addition. Since we are ruling out 0.9 recurring, what will we do if you have 0.14 recurring and 0.35 recurring? You can't just say that do coordinate wise. You do that, and then if you end with 0.9 recurring, how do you adjust that? So all this will need to be done, and all proofs will need to be worked out. That's all. That is why I'm saying informal, because I have not done it and I'm not expecting you to do it. That's all. And it is more classical to take either a Dedekind cut approach or the Cauchy sequence approach. That's all. So perhaps unofficial is not the right term to use, but something which has not been strictly part of the curriculum of this semester course. That's all. But you can do it. It's nothing which cannot be done. Okay. All right. So I don't know, maybe some of you have another class to go to. Those can leave, and others want to ask something more. I still have some time to answer those, and otherwise, if no other questions, we can stop. As I mentioned, by this evening, you should get a list of the new TAs that have been now assigned, and I have to sit with the TAs and figure out exactly what they are going to do for you. One thing is assignments, they will grade. Whether they have marks or no marks, they will grade assignments. But beyond that, whether you need some session with them or not, we will figure out slowly.
Sir, when are you going to upload the notes, like the lecture notes?
Today's notes. Well, I will need time to update the things which I have to do it by this evening. I'll put the lecture notes. The video part should come in very sooner, because I guess this will take about 10 minutes or 20 minutes to give me after I sign out. It does something, and then Zoom will give me the video. Once it gives me, I will, and I am free, I will put it up, and the PDF I will put up by this evening, because I have to change a few things. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, sir.
Okay.
Just a question, like reading non-standard analysis at this stage, will this somehow divert from the main intuitions we are about to get in this analysis course?
I would say that it will vary from person to person. Looking back to myself, I think the answer is no for me. Okay, but not all mathematicians may agree with that. Okay. They say no, such things are, you are not supposed to talk about all these things in the first year. So the reason I said it is that we should assume that when we say dt doesn't exist, dt dx doesn't exist, they do not exist in the framework we are studying. We are not rolling out that such frameworks exist. That's all.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Also, nothing much to gain by learning that right now. So I would put it this way. Okay. So when you are doing any coursework and so on, say you have 5 courses going on, there is a lot of work to do, and it's sometimes useful to get away from the coursework and focus on something else. That something else could be seeing a movie, it can be reading something, going out, whatever. It could equally be reading out something which is not part of the course. Okay. So if you read it in that framework, I see it doesn't do any harm, but opinions differ amongst people. That's all I will say.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Sir?
Yeah.
Sir, could you go to the slide of the Archimedean property of R, proof of that once?
Yeah.
Sir, so here actually we, take it for granted, right? The properties of natural numbers. We say that if m is an element of natural number, then twice m is also an element of natural number. That we take into, in our assumption, right?
Yeah.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. So let's see, what did I say? See, when I say it contains z, integer z. Okay, so when we talk about z, already whatever we have agreed about Z is already there. Okay.
Okay, okay, sir.
Right. And plus and dot are extensions of the same operations on Z. Okay. So it is already part of that. I hope I have answered.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So, you know, doing everything in this compressed fashion, you have to keep going back to say, oh, is it part of our requirement or not? Okay. So 2n is n plus n and 2n is already there. All these are included, but they are all included because we have said that our addition and multiplication are extensions of the same operations or same relations rather on Z, which in turn is consistent with n. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Okay.
Sir, I just have, oh, sorry, Shashwat. Yeah,
go ahead, go ahead. One of you had a question or observation?
Sir, in this Archimedean property, we had done you wrote a property number 10, which was h dot x is equal to, there must exist an h such that h into x is equal to 1. Yeah. So can we just say that n will be the integer
Oh, but wait a minute, we have not connected integer parts of numbers as yet.
Okay, okay, sir. Yes, got it.
Yeah, so when we do formal things, we have to be very careful. What you say is correct, but then we have to be very careful in what order we are doing things. Okay. Maybe we do that first and then this will follow. No problem.
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
Plus the greatest integer function would vary from base to base we choose. Like in decimal, it would be something, and in other base.
What will vary from base to base? What will vary?
The integer part, the greatest integer function.
Greatest integer function. Well, integer is typically defined only for integer part will not vary. Okay. Why should it depend on base to base? I didn't get your question.
Okay, the representation would vary, but eventually it would be same. Like the digits would vary. Okay.
The digits will vary, but the object will be the same.
Object will be same.
I mean, somebody can call, you know, I'm taking integer part up, I'm truncating it up to 3 decimal places. When you do that, then your base is mattering. If you're not allowing any decimal place, then representations may be different, but the number will be the same. The object will be the same. Yeah.
Sir.
Yeah.
Sir, how will we prove the Archimedean property for the field of algebraic numbers?
I'm not going to go into that right now. Okay. Because as I said, this is not at my fingertips. Okay. So it may be done in algebra course, or you can try to write it out yourself. But it will all depend on how is the algebraic field defined. Okay. Then we can see how we can write the Archimedean property.
Excuse me, sir. Does like analysis with infinitesimals have any utility in modern day mathematics? Like, I get how it formalizes Leibniz's work, but does it have like does it offer any advantages that just working over the real numbers doesn't?
Okay, so again, here opinions are different. Okay. Initially, the thing caught attention. Okay. Because I forget now, my memory is poor, but one major result in so the bringing it in says that you can actually bring in infinitesimals and create a structure, and it's an expansion, and it's a consistent expansion, which means that if you can prove in that structure some theorem about our real number system or some object which is in our real system, then if you can prove it in that, you can come back and that is provable here. Whether you can write the proof or not, but that is correct. And using this, I think one major result was first proven using the Abraham Robinson's construction. Okay, so that caught a lot of attention, and but soon, since there is a theorem which says that if there is a proof which uses the extension, then there is a proof which also can be done without going to the extension. And lo and behold, somebody wrote out a proof of the same thing right here. And this has gone on for some time. So what may happen is that the proof may be easier in that system, shorter in that system. Okay. But so I have thought on these things and talked to various people. So I don't know how many of you have heard this name, Daniel Struck, the probabilist and close friend and co-author with Varadan. And he has visited India, and I have met him outside as well. So once I was having the same debate with him, that isn't it easier to prove using the hyperreals? And his answer was that if you are willing to live in hyperreals, yes, it is easier. But if you want to start from our usual thing, go to hyperreals, do that proof easily, and then come back, then there is a lot of pain in going up and coming down. So he called it law of conservation of pain. And therefore he says that therefore using hyperreals doesn't give you any advantage. That was his answer. But forgetting all this, intuition wise, it certainly helped. It has helped me enormously in my intuition when I'm happy to accept a framework of hyperreals and hyper everything. Just don't stop with real. It has a hyper complex, it has hyper this, hyper, every hyper object is available there. Okay. In particular, my area of work or expertise or whatever you may call it, probability theory and so on and so forth, is also there in hyperreals, and it's many things are much easier to do. And my introduction to all this was because when I was a PhD student, there was such a visitor who came to give a talk at ISI Calcutta involving probability theory and hyperreals. And I was asked to attend that course. And when I protested saying that I don't know what these are, I was told, okay, just read this in half an hour and go. So that is what my introduction was. But anyway. So advantage certainly intuition wise and understanding or accepting things is there. But in actual proving, perhaps now more or less everybody grants that there is not much. So by the way, I can add that I'm forgetting the name and the university, but at least in one US university, one of the known US universities, there was a professor, maths professor, who was heavily into hyperreals, and he has written out a whole, he taught for some years the analysis 1, 2, 3 sequence using hyperreals only. And there is a textbook using that. But over a period of time, that has stopped. Okay.
This is the lecture of hyperreals. That's
sorry.
Lecture on hyperreals. That's the book you were talking about.
No. Lecture on hyperreal is one lecture I can give or I will give. There may be a book called Lecture on Hyperreals, or there is a textbook, entire calculus, infinitesimal calculus, it may be called. While we are chatting, let me stop sharing and let me get the name of hyperreal business, author and the book name. I'm putting it in the chat. Jerome Kistler, Keisler, and Foundations of Infinitesimal Calculus. He calls it infinitesimal calculus. Okay. So, well, my recommendation is that you don't have to read not just this book, but anything about hyperreals. Even if you read, don't try to read it with as much time as you are devoting to your coursework. This can only be a bedside reading. But accept these things as possibly there is a framework where it can be done. That's it.
So is it elementary calculus and infinitesimal approach?
There can be another book with that name. Or Kistler himself may have more than one books.
Okay, sir.
Okay. I think that he has more than one book. The other book, he says, he makes some statements saying that, he's taking it for granted right now because it will be done only in his foundations book because it needs some more technicalities. So, so in that, there are infinite integers and infinite integers. So square of an infinite integer is a larger square infinite integer. Square root of infinite integer is an infinite number, but which is smaller. Things like that. And some of you in your school would have had a statistics probability thing, and you would have heard something called law of large numbers, that if you you toss a coin large number of times and then the proportion of success is close to the etc., close to half. In this framework, there is a probability in this. It will say that if you toss it infinitely many times, the ratio is exactly equal to the probability, or infinitesimally close to the probability. Instead of limit, there is infinitesimally close. Such statements are there. They are all formalized in that framework. But as I said, you do badly in the, you don't get good grades, and you tell the other teacher, sir, it's only because our probably analysis teacher got us hooked into infinitesimal numbers. Then people are not going to be happy with that. So whatever time you spend on this, if you want to, is only after ensuring that you are spending required time on your other courses. Okay. I'm not saying nobody should do it. I'm not saying everybody should do it. Each one can choose. That is the right way to put it. You spend infinitesimal amount of time on this. Yes. Good one. Good one. So do it only finitely many times. Don't do it infinitely many times, because infinitely many times infinitesimal can also exceed a large number. Okay. So, there was a time changing things a little bit. At one point, I had lost interest in what I would call finitary mathematics. That is, say, number theory. Why would I care about number theory? What is big deal? Whether a number is rational, prime or not, I may not be able to answer it, but if I spend enough time, I'll know the answer. What is the big deal? Why we have to spend so much energy on that? Because I could not use any of that in areas of interest to me or what I thought are interesting. So continuum mathematics, so things where everything you are doing with real numbers or complex numbers or more complicated objects, not on a finite set. A big deal. Anything on finite set, if I spend enough time, I can figure it out. Perhaps I never put it in that way, but maybe that is why I had lost any interest in any such thing. Okay. So I had friends who were big experts in number theory and they got awards, etc. So not that I disrespected them, but I said, yeah, but that is not for me. I don't have to do any of that. Okay. And till I came to cryptography. And that is where all these finitary things come in hugely. Okay. So,
Sir.
Yeah.
Sir, if you take any set with without a least upper bound property and try to pick a number on the real number line, then the probability that the number will be in that set it should be close to 0, right?
Well, but you have to then, how is probability defined on that new set? So, there is these two dichotomy things. One is the formal one. So in that you have to define everything formally. Other thing is informal one, and in informal one you have to accept the reason also is informal capacity only. So informal capacity, what you say is true. How do I prove it? Well, I can't prove it because we have not defined the probabilities on that framework. Because
we can go with the usual measure, the length in the real number line. That is, we can go with the usual measure in that sense.
But then so formal and informal, again, usual on real number system, we have not defined real number system. Then what is the usual? So one has to work on both the frameworks. Okay. So in our analysis course, we will not accept a proof unless it uses only what we have stated as actions for R. Okay. But that doesn't mean that that is not to be done, but not done in this course. Okay. Because at some point we have to graduate and we have to be able to do everything formally as well. So So, in fact, whole lot of physics they don't like spending so much time on what is real number system and what is this, what is that. They say you mathematicians are useless because you spend a whole lot of time trying on doing things which are all well known to us. Okay, that's one view. Some mathematician can reply that, okay, we can ensure that you don't make errors. So you can point out to something which was believed by physicists, but error was found using these formal systems. But then they can come and say that, okay, even after doing all your formal system, such and such a big name did write something which was wrong, which was later proven to be wrong because he had not taken care. So these arguments can go on. So, to give you the last thing, what I meant is that it is possible for us to believe that I am doing everything in the formal way and all steps I am using are already accepted and proven, but you may be making an error there. As a PhD student, the first thing I attempted to was of this kind. And worst part was that the error was in an area which I thought I am a master at, the measure theory and finite and sets and measure theoretic arguments, because we believe that all of us who are PhD students in ISI, all of us are masters with measure theory. And yet my error turned out to be misinterpreting some statement in measure theory. So not just that, there are errors which have been done by very, very big names. A mathematical error done by someone as well known as Wiener. In work with someone who was director of ISI when I was a PhD student. And the error was when that gentleman was only a fresh faculty member at ISI. They did something, wrote something up, but finally it had to be discarded because it was found that it was an error.
So just just a question about the Dedekind cuts. Is the Dedekind cuts like the supremum of the, I mean, least upper bound of the rationals? That's how the Dedekind cut are. Where the Dedekind cut are. Like I read earlier, like don't exactly remember.
Dedekind cut, my memory that you take you start with a set and then you say that set you divide it into two subsets. Every element in the first is less than equal to every element in the other. Less than. Partition it in two parts where everything here is less than everything there. Okay.
We are doing this on the rational field.
Yeah. Okay. And now it is possible that one of them has the largest number or one of them has the smallest number, or it could be that both are such that they neither have a largest or the second one doesn't have the smallest. Like square root 2. You know, you take the standard example that you know. You take a cut headed by square root 2. So all rationals less than square root 2, you put in one set. All things bigger than square root 2, you put in the other set. Now this is a cut. You take all possible cuts. And now try to define addition, multiplication, everything on that. And formalize that. Or the other one is Cauchy sequence. You take all Cauchy sequence of rational numbers. Now you define when two of them are the same, equate them. From each one, pick one. And now define addition and multiplication. That is the way of doing it via Cauchy's ideas. Probably that is the, if I teach, I will use that. And if somebody else teaches, maybe they can use Dedekind cuts, I don't know. But both these are doable. And for your own thing, you can try extra time, not part of your curriculum time. Try to see how doing it with decimal expansions or binary expansions, infinitely many, how much effort is needed to formalize everything. Defining, basically you have to define addition, multiplication and order and ensure that it's extending the way you have it already.
Actually, sir, with the decimal expansions one, can't you actually bring that under the Cauchy sequences one, like converging partial sums, right?
Yeah, you can bring it there, but there you bring in all Cauchy sequences. No, you don't just say that only this.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. I get the difference. Yeah.
Sir, apparently somebody is in the waiting room.
Oh, now?
So maybe they would have been disconnected or something. So.
Okay. Now, how do I see that? Let's see. Participants. This is one thing I don't like. I can't figure out how do I.
Sir, if you press security option, there should be an option to disable waiting room.
Ah. Good. So next class onwards, if you have to wait, as soon as you come in, you tell me, sir, you have forgotten to disable waiting option as you had promised. Okay. Then we will stop through this. Yeah. Okay. All right. I'll move on and to attend to something else now. Most days after my session, I would have at least 15 minutes to spare. Okay, most days. If someday there is a class, I have some phone I have to attend right away, I can tell you, sorry, not today, but most days I should have at least 15 minutes to sit if anybody has any discussion. And all these things have become extremely important because of this online method. In the usual thing, people, I mean, even when I was director, students were always welcome to walk into my office. Singleton, 2, 3, 5, all, everything was allowed in CMI, not just me, for most faculty members. Okay. But online, we have to think of innovative ways of doing it. All right.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
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 Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome. I am happy.